just quickly conclude with three. I'm not going to develop these, but I'll just throw them out there and maybe we can pick them up in the discussion. Three questions about Gordon's theory. One is that he's certainly demonstrated correlation between strategies of labor discipline and urban change. And the strongest example is obviously the shift from the industrial to the corporate monopoly city, where he's got the smoking gun, where the industrialists themselves are saying they're looking for docile workers, and that's why they move to the suburbs. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the explanation. Just because there's a correlation doesn't mean that the correlation is a cause or the cause. And there might be a lot of other factors involved, even if one of them is capitalist strategies to discipline workers. So I'm convinced that capitalist labor discipline strategy is part of the puzzle, but demonstrating that correlation doesn't mean in and of itself that it's the cause. So I think Gordon has a problem there where he's demonstrating correlation with reference to each phase, but he's got to go further to exclude other factors if he really wants to drive home the argument that that's the only or the key factor. And that leads me to a second point, which is that, is there an explanatory overstretch here? So Gordon, his theory is basically that labor discipline explains each major systemic change. And again, I'm convinced that it's part of it, but his approach excludes the possibility that we might need different combinations of factors in different moments. So the shift from the industrial to the corporate monopoly, like I think unless you bring in the state, unless you bring in strategies of racial segregation, like bring in, W.E.B. Du Bois's account, but updated to the mid-20th century, there's no way we can understand what's going on. But his whole explanation is totally tied to labor discipline. So he's sort of depriving himself from other explanatory mechanisms that we might need to bring in conjuncturally. So again, I'm not dismissing what he's analyzing, but I'm simply suggesting that the theory might be a little too elegant and we might need a little bit more messiness in order to understand processes. Also, I would add, the remaking of New York, we might need a different theory to understand the remaking of New York than, let's say, to understand the building and remaking of LA or San Francisco. Like some of the same factors are going to be involved, but a kind of universal theory may actually tie our hands, like we're always kind of looking for the same factor. It becomes a little bit mechanistic. And the third one that I'll just quickly mention is just the question of workers' agency. So despite his emphasis on agency, resistance, activism, and his call for activism at the end, his theory actually, despite his kind of Marxist credentials, it seems to imply that capital is always the first mover in the production of urban landscapes. And that rebellious workers, as rebellious as they are, they just have to react. So workers unsettle things, but they don't really build things in Gordon's theory. And this may inadvertently, despite his, he's obviously a kind of an economist who's concerned about workers and improving workers' conditions and rights. But inadvertently, his theory may misrepresent the working classes and maybe other marginalized communities as well as passive victims. So anyway, so in